He wanted the guard to salute him. Not the king. Him. I was holding a tray of drink 6 feet away when Desmond Calloway said it out loud, grinning for the photographer like it was a line he'd rehearsed in a mirror. "Go on, Corporal," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear over the string quartet. "Show them what loyalty looks like." Corporal Tobias Render did not move. He stood where he always stood, at the foot of the new donor wall in the Hall of Patrons, rifle at his shoulder, chin level, eyes fixed on some point past everyone's heads. The wall behind him was still draped in white silk, waiting to be unveiled, and at the very top of it, larger than any other name on the list, was his, Calloway's, not the guard's. Calloway had given 200,000 crowns to the benefactors fund that year, more than anyone had given in a decade, and he'd made sure every soul in that hall knew it before the canapes were even passed around. He'd arrived 40 minutes late, on purpose I think, so the room would already be full when he walked in. He talked over the chairman's welcome remarks without lowering his voice. He'd asked, twice, when his wall would be unveiled, and whether the guard came with the room or could be moved somewhere better lit, for the photo. I'd heard the older staff talk about him before that night, a man who'd built 3 fortunes and lost 2 of them and still somehow always arrived at these things looking like a 4th was already accounted for. He gave generously, that part was never in question, and he believed, as far as I could tell, that generosity on that scale was owed a kind of interest. Not gratitude, exactly. Something closer to obedience. He had never once, in 3 galas I'd worked, asked anyone in that hall to do something they couldn't do. Tonight was the first time, and I think some part of him simply hadn't considered that the answer could be no. Now the wall was about to come down, the photographer was crouched and ready below it, and Calloway wanted one more thing before the silk dropped, a salute. From the guard. For the camera. "He's not going to do that, sir," I said, because somebody had to, and the events office didn't pay me enough to know better. "He's on post. He doesn't break for. He'll break for the men keeping the lights on in this building," Calloway said, still smiling, though the smile had gone thin at the edges. "Won't you, Corporal?" Render's eyes didn't move. Not a flicker. I'd worked 3 of these galas already, and I had never once seen a man hold an entire room's attention by doing absolutely nothing, but he did it now. The whole crowd of donors and patrons and politely starving museum board artists turned, half laughing, to watch a man in a red tunic decline to answer a question nobody had technically asked him out loud. In any sane room, that would have been the end of it. It wasn't. Calloway reached into his jacket and came out with a folded note of currency, holding it up between 2 fingers like a magician about to do a trick. 30 seconds, he said, loud enough to draw a laugh from the men nearest him. 1 salute, 1 photograph, and this is yours. Buy yourself something nice, Corporal. God knows what they pay you. A few people did laugh. I didn't. I watched Render's eyes for any sign they'd so much as register the money was there, and there was none, not contempt, not temptation, nothing at all, the way you wouldn't blink at a fly landing on a stone wall. Calloway waited a beat too long for an answer that was never coming, and something in his face shifted from amused to irritated, the way it does for men who aren't used to an offer going unanswered. He laughed once, short, like he was still deciding whether to stay amused, and then he stepped closer, closer than anyone stands to a guard on post, close enough that I saw 2 of the older patrons by the punch table actually flinch, and he reached up and closed his free hand around Render's wrist. I want to be fair to him about this much, I don't think he meant to hurt anyone. He meant it as theater. He just wanted to lift the rifle arm into a salute himself, the way you'd pose a mannequin for a window display, and have the photographer catch it before anyone could object. "There," he said, tugging. "Like that. Smile, Corporal, you're famous now." The arm did not move. Calloway pulled again, harder, and I watched the half-second cross his face where he understood that he wasn't lifting a costume, he was failing to move a man. Somewhere behind me a champagne glass clinked too hard against a saucer and went quiet. Even the string quartet seemed to find a softer passage to land on. "I pay your wages, soldier," Calloway said. He wasn't smiling anymore. "Every guard in this hall, every stitch on your back, every brick in this building, this whole wall behind you with my name on it. The least you owe me is a salute." He didn't get one. Not in words, not in the arm. Render simply turned his wrist out of Calloway's grip, gently, the way you'd turn a door handle that didn't need forcing, and went back to looking at nothing in particular, 6 inches above the donor's head, as if the last 15 seconds hadn't happened to him at all. The photographer's shutter went off twice during it, not on the cue she'd been briefed to wait for. The shot she'd actually been hired to take, Calloway shaking the guard's hand beneath his own gold-lettered name, never got taken, not once, all evening. What she caught instead was a donor's fingers wrapped around a motionless wrist, his mouth open mid-sentence, and a guardsman's face entirely unbothered, like a man waiting out weather that wasn't his to be moved by. Otto Quill, the museum board chairman, leaned toward me with his drink and murmured, not quietly enough, "I have been trying to get that man to so much as nod at me for 3 galas running. Apparently money doesn't help." I didn't answer him either. It didn't feel like my place to agree out loud, even though I did. I grew up 2 streets from a regiment yard myself, and my father used to tell me the guards weren't statues, they were men who decided, fresh every single morning, not to be moved by anything that wasn't worth moving for. I never quite believed him until that night. I learned the rest of it much later, from one of the older corporals smoking by the kitchen door. Render's own father had spent 30 years repairing the stone of that very gate, for a mason's wage that barely covered the rent, and had told his son once that the men who pay to have things built are never the same as the men who build them, and that a man's loyalty is the one thing on this earth that isn't for sale at any price, because the moment you sell it, it stops being loyalty and becomes rent. Render had never told that story to a single donor in his life. He'd never had to. He just stood there, and let the story stand there with him, where nobody could see it but somehow everybody in that room felt it anyway. By the time the silk finally came down off the wall, the comptroller gave the signal herself, visibly eager to move things along before Calloway could try anything else. He had recovered enough composure to laugh it off for the room, calling it regimental humor, raising his glass to the king's famous discipline. Most of the patrons laughed along with him, because that is what a room full of donors does when the alternative is awkward silence. The comptroller, Mrs. Lynette Sorrell, did not laugh. She didn't look away from Render once, the whole time the silk was falling, and I understood afterward that she had already decided what she meant to do about it before the fabric had finished hitting the floor. It happened fast after that, and quietly, the way real consequences in that building always seemed to happen. No raised voices, no scene made in front of the donors, just a short conversation behind a closed office door the next morning that I only heard about secondhand from the comptroller's own assistant. Calloway, sensing the room had cooled on him faster than he liked, tried to fix it the only way he knew how. First he offered to double his pledge if the regiment would put out a statement calling the whole thing a warm moment between a guard and his most generous patron. When that didn't move anyone, he tried the opposite. If there was any fuss made about it, in any paper, anywhere, he would withdraw every crown he'd given, past and future, and see to it that the museum board heard exactly why. Mrs. Sorrell told him, with the same even courtesy she might have used to decline a second slice of cake, that the regiment would in fact be returning his entire gift that same evening, every crown of it, wired back before midnight, and that his name would not, after all, be remaining on the wall. "That's an overreaction to a bit of fun," he reportedly said. "It isn't a reaction at all, Mr. Calloway," she told him. "It's a correction. The wall exists to honor people who give because the giving is the whole of the gesture. Your gift arrived with a price quietly attached to it, and the regiment does not pay prices for its guards' salutes. It has only ever had one customer for those, and it is not currently accepting new bidders, regardless of the sum offered." By the following afternoon there was a pale, freshly scrubbed rectangle at the top of the donor wall where his name had been, and nobody in the building ever mentioned it again, not where I could hear them. The guards on the other posts heard about it within the hour, the way these things travel, not from Render, who never said a word about it to anyone that I ever heard, but from the rest of us, the staff who'd actually been standing there. One of the younger sentries told me, weeks later, that the sergeant of the watch had said nothing to Render at all when the news came down, only stopped in front of him at the changing of the guard and held a salute of his own a half-second longer than regulation called for. Render hadn't acknowledged it. He hadn't needed to. The photograph that ran in the city paper 2 days later was not the one Calloway had paid the photographer to take. It was the other one, the wrist, the open mouth, the unmoved face, and underneath it ran no caption at all, because none was needed. The picture said what it had to say on its own, the same way Render had. I went back to the Hall of Patrons a week later to help strike the gala furniture, and Render was on post like always, like nothing at all had happened to him, because to him, nothing had. I brought him water at the end of my shift, which I wasn't supposed to do, and which he wasn't strictly supposed to accept, and for 1 second his eyes actually came down off whatever far point they usually rested on and found mine. "Your father," I said. I don't know why I said it. It just came out. "Was he proud of you?" "He never saw the uniform," Render said. "He died building the gate I stand at now. He took the water but didn't drink it in front of me. Guards don't, not on post. He only held it, and for just a moment something in his face wasn't stillness at all. It was grief, held the exact same way he held everything else, upright, unspent, entirely his own, and not for sale to anyone who happened to be standing close enough to ask for it." Then his eyes went back up, past my head, to whatever it is a man like that looks at when there's nothing in front of him worth moving for. I took my tray and left him to it. The donor wall in the Hall of Patrons carries 41 names on it now. His isn't one of them, and it never will be. Guards don't go on the donor wall, the comptroller told me once, not because their service isn't worth honoring, but because what they give was never for sale to begin with, and you don't carve a price tag onto the one thing in the building that was always, only, freely given. I think about that gala more than I think about almost anything else from those years. Not the wine, not the names, not even Calloway's face when his money stopped working on a man for the first time in his life. I think about the half-second before the wall came down, when an entire room full of people who'd paid for nearly everything else in their lives watched one man hold still, and understood, whether they wanted to or not, that some things are simply not for purchase, no matter who's asking, and no matter what they're holding out to pay for it.